Psychology expert Mark Derian has just published his second book explaining the exact structure of emotions and the fundamental principles behind achieving mental health. We'll go through the 3 principles behind this discovery and answer the question:
how do you deal with judging yourself for judging yourself? It's tough, man. You end up with this infinite regress of feeling bad, and then feeling bad about feeling bad, and then feeling resentful about feeling bad, and then getting frustrated at your resentment, and then getting anxious about your frustration. And yeah, these second, third, fourth order emotions that go all the way back, especially when the very thing that you need is the very thing you're complaining about, right? You weren't kind to yourself, and now I'm not being kind to myself about not being kind to myself. Unfortunately, I do not have anything remotely appropriating a solution for this.
We'll break down the precise issue Chris has been struggling with his whole life and how these recently discovered principles can solve the problem. We'll also cover the fundamental link missing from Dr. K's approach.
How can all mental illness be getting worse at the same time? Like, that just doesn't make sense. What they discovered is that there are certain things called transdiagnostic criteria for mental illness. And what that means is that if you're perfectionistic, perfectionism is a risk factor for anxiety disorders, it's a risk factor for depression, it's a risk factor for like OCD, it's a risk factor for OCPD. So there are some basic traits which increase your risk for like all kinds of mental illnesses. So if you target these transdiagnostic criteria, then everything down the road will get better.
Dr. K is on the right track, but what if there's an even more fundamental layer beneath these transdiagnostic factors, a core insight that can unify our understanding of all mental struggle? Mark Derian's recently published work provides the answer through 3 powerful principles. Let's explore the first one. Principle 1. Primary emotions. 52 years ago, philosophy professor Harry Binswanger published the biological basis for teleological concepts, showing that every conscious biological process is goal-directed. It's either moving towards a goal or away from a goal. And this also applies to emotions. So there can be only 2 primary emotions, one driving us towards a goal, another restraining us from a goal. I asked Professor Binswanger if he agreed.
Based on the biological basis of teleological concepts, Harry Binswanger's first book, biological functions are goal-directed. Would this apply to emotions? And if so, are there only 2 fundamental emotions, one driving us towards a goal and one restraining us from that goal?
Well, I was with you up until that last phrase. Yes, the emotions are naturally selected to be the impetus to take actions that help us survive, right? Mm-hmm. And the origin of the emotions is a pleasure-pain mechanism, which is attuned to survival. And this has been known for a long time, that even before it was identified, it hurts to jab yourself with a knife. It tastes good to eat nutritious food when you're hungry, to drink when you're thirsty. So if it didn't, any organism and there have been such, whose wiring is wrong, they die. Because they like, let me stab that's a parody, but the equivalent.
Yep.
Eating things that are bad for them, for instance. But now, there's 2 fundamental emotions: approach and avoid. Go after and flee, not restraining. There's no, what would that be? There's only love and fear, in effect. Attraction and aversion are the 2 fundamentals, and you can find that those are components in all the other emotions.
Harry disagrees with the term restraining. In Mark's model, anger is the drive towards a value, and anxiety acts as the force that restrains. From a psychological perspective, anxiety subjectively feels like it's restraining us, but Harry is making a key philosophical distinction. Emotions don't technically restrain us, they're always moving us, either towards or away from a value.
You are technically correct. The best kind of correct.
Professor Binswanger made an interesting comment at the end. The 2 fundamental emotions are components in all the other emotions. Just as there are 3 primary colors combining to create an infinite color wheel, there are 2 primary emotions combining to create infinite feeling states. How they do this is the subject of Principle 2, the structure of emotions. Emotions start from a trigger in reality. In the case of anxiety, this will be a loss or a threat of loss. For anger, it will be a need or an injustice. We have the primary emotion, either anxiety or anger, and we have 3 decisions we can make. We can avoid, make a destructive decision, or make a constructive decision. These 5 stages of emotion will map on to the 5 stages of emotional processing, which we'll get to shortly. First, let's fill out the emotional diagram. When we avoid our anxiety, it becomes obsessive-compulsive disorder. Obsessive thoughts that are some form of I can't, often felt as self-criticism, and compulsive behavior is often experienced as busyness with the subtext of I have to. The classic example of this is when a bill comes in the mail that you can't afford, and instead of opening it, you start to rearrange your cutlery. The unpaid bill represents a loss, and you avoid the anxiety it brings up by behaving compulsively instead. This could look like browsing Reddit or Instagram or any other distraction. Substance abuse and impulsiveness are common compulsive behaviors. Other symptoms of avoidance include psychological symptoms such as lack of focus, panic, apathy, and physical symptoms such as insomnia, fidgeting, nail biting, hand wringing, indigestion, or muscle tension. For anger, this avoidance leads to sadness and eventually depression. You feel uncomfortable with the anger, it's overwhelming, and you distract yourself from it. This is a natural response and can be good in the short term to manage the stress and help to figure out your needs. However, long term it becomes destructive. Allowing sadness to be felt and processed for about 2 to 4 weeks is considered a healthy time frame. After about 6 months of sadness, it's classified as depression. When we're destructive with our anxiety, this leads to helplessness. This is when we inflict anxiety on others by complaining, criticism, sometimes self-criticism if we're conflict avoidant, victimhood, perfectionism, martyrdom, or passive aggressiveness. With anger, this destructiveness leads to hostility, inflicting anger on others. This comes from a scarcity or zero-sum mentality. The belief that in order for you to get your needs met, someone else must lose. Examples are jealousy, preemptive violence, revenge, resentment, verbal abuse, temper tantrums, or stealing. These behaviors can make you feel better in the short term, but don't heal you, and ultimately leads to further hostility. The constructive way to handle anxiety is to confront it. This is the mature, courageous way to manage anxiety. You know there's a solution, that you can find a mutually beneficial response. This leads to confidence, which feels like calmness. The more anxiety we confront, the more confident we become. You don't even need to be successful. Confidence comes from the courageous act even if you fail. However, the catch is that we must be bold when we confront the anxiety, and we must be consistent. Otherwise we will only experience relief, which will lead to feeling stuck with the anxiety. The more confident you become, the more you will begin to experience anxiety as excitement. Instead of dreading anxiety, you anticipate the good that will come from confronting it. The constructive way to handle anger is to assert it. We think of a mutually beneficial way to get our needs met. Assertiveness is sometimes pathologized as aggression, but if you're finding creative solutions to grow and offering value to get your needs met, there's no such thing as being too assertive. This leads to compassion. As you get your needs met, you see the world as a place conducive to getting your needs met. The one caveat is that, unlike confidence, it's necessary to succeed in getting your needs met to develop compassion. With confidence you can fake it till you make it, but faking compassion only leads to repression. And as anxiety physiologically looks like excitement, anger feels like desire once you develop compassion. The angriest people would never be described as angry. They would appear driven. They're looking forward to getting their needs met and the growth they'll experience in doing so. If you're curious about how the 2 primary emotions combine in other ways to form other common emotions, I've included links to articles and videos that go into more depth in the chapter notes in the description below. I've also included links to 6 videos that cover each of the 6 decisions in more depth. Now, the emotional diagram is only a map. It indicates where we can go and points of interest along the way, but there are often obstacles that impede us from reaching the destination. So let's discuss how to get there by going through the 5 stages of emotional processing. The first step is to state the facts. Whatever facts you feel are relevant, but it's helpful to include what happened, what affected you, and how you responded. This isn't a court of law, it's psychology. If you get the facts wrong due to unconscious feelings, that's okay. The more you continue this process, the better you'll get at distinguishing the facts. After stating the facts, we discuss the feeling. As you say the facts, notice how you feel. Whatever iteration of anxiety or anger you feel, it can be helpful to note the sensation and where in the body you feel it. Next, we discuss what the feeling means to you, which leads to awareness, which is the way out of avoidance. What does the feeling mean about you? Not what the facts mean about you, only the feeling. The answer is whatever comes to your mind first, will help to reveal your unconscious belief system. The next step is to ask why 3 times and keep each answer about you. So, the government oppresses me becomes, I feel oppressed by the government. The goal isn't to get to the root of the issue or figure anything out. Insights will come on their own time. There's no correct answer or something to figure out, only something to look at. One example Mark gives in his book is feeling overwhelmed. What does the feeling of being overwhelmed mean about you? It means I'm always behind. Why? I have a lot of regrets. Why? I took the easy road. Why? I don't want to feel my anxiety. The next step is taking responsibility for your feeling. There are 3 steps to responsibility, but it will make more sense if we cover this after we understand the third principle. This is the way out of being destructive, but most people make the mistake of talking about how the situation is their responsibility, and it might be, but it's more important to take responsibility for your feelings. Besides, you won't be able to feel and act like the situation is your responsibility until you can take responsibility for any feelings you have about it. We'll get into how to take responsibility in the next section. The final step is to ask, what am I able to do? Not what Jocko Willink or David Goggins or Jesus would do. What is one thing, based on the first 4 steps, that you are able to do? Once you state what you're able to do, you don't have to do it, there's no obligation, and you don't have to find the perfect solution. If you're struggling with this, one thing you're always able to do is write out for yourself what you could say to anyone involved in the healthiest way possible, and how you could say it in a way that the other person will be able to hear you. These 5 steps, which Mark calls honesty, are how you process emotions. These are the patterns of behaviors that inform psychological reality, but they have a mirror image that is the pattern of mental processes that inform psychological reality. They're the unconscious emotional pattern which create these behaviors, which leads us to Principle 3, the loop. The loop can be either adaptive or maladaptive, but it always follows this structure. First we have healthy anger, a response to a healthy need. Next is unhealthy anxiety, that represses the healthy anger. This leads to psychological isolation and the affect of shame. The first steps create stress. The secondary emotional payoff distracts or compensates for the stress. It is one or many of the unhealthy expressions of emotion. It's an addiction that distracts us from the pain of reality. Finally, we have the belief, which will be some form of, I'm not good enough. And because this is a loop, the belief informs the anxiety and perpetuates the cycle. The belief that you're not good enough will cause you to repress your healthy needs with anxiety. Let's look at Chris's loop. To help us understand the structure before addressing how to get out of this loop, pay attention to Chris's vulnerable share as we break this down. For context, Chris has just had the biggest 7 days of his career. Interviews with Joe Rogan and Naval Ravikant represent crowning achievements. The healthy anger is wanting them to go well, to feel competent, successful, and to have his efforts validated and enjoyed. The desire for these podcasts to be a positive, affirming experience.
I think a theme has been self-kindness over the last week. A common motivator to make you work harder, or just a framing that you have a lot of the time around challenges you've got coming up. At least for me, is fear. A lot of the time it's worry, it's concern, it's how could this go wrong. It's avoiding negatives, not necessarily expediting positives.
Notice the words Chris uses here. Fear, worry, concern, avoiding negatives are all variations of anxiety. The anxiety is that he messed up the Joe Rogan podcast, but isn't just about the podcast itself, but what a perceived failure means about him.
I guess that's not necessarily bad. You want to avoid pitfalls. They're pretty important to get away from.
Yes, absolutely. There is healthy anxiety. Avoiding legitimate pitfalls is something you want to experience anxiety around to make you more aware. Whether it's an anxiety issue depends on if the threat is real or imagined, how accurately it reflects reality.
The plane ride from Austin to San Jose I was really mean to myself, and I don't think I deserved it, you know. I don't think I deserved it. Fucking random people on the internet. Random people on the internet were kinder to me than I was to myself.
This is the payoff, the self-criticism. It soothes the stress that was caused by the first stages. It's a known but painful state. It can provide a perverse sense of control. If I beat myself up, no one else can, or I'm preempting their criticism. It also creates a justification for the anxiety. The self-criticism proves the initial anxiety was warranted. And paradoxically, harsh self-criticism can be a defense against the deeper vulnerability of truly accepting success and the potential for future failure or exposure. There can sometimes be a subtle righteousness or martyrdom. I'm so hard on myself, I strive for perfection.
You know, my confidence has taken a hit over the last few months. I would say purposefully de-optimizing my life and purposefully slowing it down has forced me to reckon with being like less important or being less busy. And a busy calendar is a hedge against existential loneliness, and asking yourself deeper questions and not getting caught up in momentum.
Reduced confidence increased the anxiety. Slowing down his life gave him more awareness of his anxiety. And as he eloquently explains, a lot of the busyness was avoiding the isolation and shame that led to loneliness. Slowing down is painful in the short term, but necessary for processing the underlying issues.
You know, if you're moving forward and you've got all this inertia behind you and you're just like cranking, rolling downhill, you don't have to face as many sort of inner turmoil questions. But if you're forced to slow down, or if you try to make yourself slow down, you end up paying a lot more attention to these little things come up, these little patterns, these little worries. You can't hide them in bravado or confidence or momentum. And I think between that and really, really fighting with health, it's created a very fertile soil for my own self-doubt to grow out of.
Very well put. And I'm highlighting the health issues because that will of course create anxiety over a loss of health, adding to the stress, which the payoff, the self-criticism, is helping to manage. By self-criticizing, there's an attempt to take control of the situation in his mind.
And it very quickly goes from I'm not sure if I'm going to perform well to you're not good enough to you fucked up to this is the end to no one's interested in you, you're not supposed to be here, you were never supposed to be here, everybody thinks that you're silly.
Notice the maladaptive beliefs that come up in this process. Different ways of saying I'm not good enough. Feeling not good enough and silly is a manifestation of the shame.
This isn't, just the worst. Like, imagine the worst fucking Reddit thread that you can, like, all of the most critical comments on Reddit. And that's kind of where you're able to go to if you feel a bit vulnerable, if you feel a little bit, on the back foot.
Imagining the worst Reddit thread of the most critical comments is a great illustration of what psychological isolation feels like.
Yeah, be kinder to yourself, I think, is my main takeaway.
On the surface, the instruction to be kinder to himself seems reasonable, but it's actually a subtler form of the maladaptive belief. I'm not good enough at being kind to myself. And we can see how this perpetuates the cycle. When we inevitably fail at being kinder to ourselves, we can self-criticize. You know you're supposed to be kinder to yourself, but you failed again. And this loop leads neatly onto the subsequent meta loop. Let's take a listen.
How do you deal with judging yourself for judging yourself? In your latest vlog, you talked about how you weren't kind to yourself after your Joe Rogan interview. Then you seem to be judging yourself for that. Yeah, dude. It's so funny that you say that. I was trying to be unkind to my unkindness to myself. So how do you deal with judging yourself for judging yourself is a super smart question. And it's tough, man. You end up with this infinite regress of feeling bad and then feeling bad about feeling bad and then feeling resentful about feeling bad and then getting frustrated at your resentment and then getting anxious about your frustration. And yeah, these second, third, fourth order emotions that go all the way back. Especially when the very thing that you need is the very thing you're complaining about, right? You weren't kind to yourself, and now I'm not being kind to myself about not being kind to myself.
Again, we have the healthy anger, the resentment and frustration at not being kind to himself, the healthy need to have compassion for himself. As he mentions, he feels anxiety about this frustration, although he doesn't elaborate on the specifics here. This perpetuates the same cycle of isolation, payoff, and maladaptive belief. But interestingly, this is a subset of a broader loop, the validation loop. Chris has spoken about the work he's done in therapy around a long-term issue of people-pleasing and getting more comfortable with challenging his guests. The healthy anger would be a need for authentic expression or connection to validate himself. Common unhealthy anxieties could be feeling that if he's truly himself or asserts his needs, he will be disapproved of, rejected, or seen as not good enough. There could be a fear of conflict that asserting needs might lead to. We can see some of this focus on external validation in the first loop. Quotes like, no one's interested in you, everyone thinks that you're silly, or imagining the most critical comments on Reddit. And this leads to internal isolation and shame. By not being authentic, he becomes disconnected from his true self. The people-pleasing might involve suppressing needs, conforming, overperforming, seeking constant reassurance and avoiding conflict. a sense of shame about not being true to himself or that his authentic self isn't good enough. We get an indication that the sense of importance was tied to external validation through busyness or achievement from the quote, "Purposefully slowing it down has forced me to reckon with being less important or being less busy." The payoff is a temporary feeling of acceptance or the avoidance of immediate conflict or disapproval. When the people-pleasing fails or feels insufficient, or when the inauthenticity becomes too much, the self-criticism kicks in. I didn't please them enough, I wasn't good enough, I should have done X differently. The self-criticism becomes its own familiar, albeit painful, emotional state. The belief becomes, I must constantly strive for external validation and be perfect, because I am inherently not good enough on my own. If I fail, I deserve criticism. And we can see how these beliefs feed into Chris's view of the world. Let's take a look.
Men need to accumulate sufficient man points before they can open up about their feelings. Basically feels like men have to earn the right to talk about their emotions. Chris Bumstead, as an example, can talk about crying and fear and insecurities, but only because he's the greatest bodybuilder of his era and a 6-time champion. Only men who have achieved some degree of success in typical masculine pursuits like status, resources, attractiveness, muscularity, and strength can open up about emotions with credibility. And once they've accumulated sufficient man points, some unspoken video game level unlock happens where emotions are allowed, but opening up before having the requisite man points is interpreted as feeble and weak. I think the world still has many icks around men showing their emotions, but far fewer if it comes from a place of prestige than one of poverty.
I want to break this down philosophically first before addressing the psychological belief here. First, it is completely valid to fear weakness. This is a healthy anxiety. The assumption that Chris makes is that expressing emotions is always weak, but that you can get away with it if you have status. However, expressing emotions isn't always weak. If you can take responsibility for your emotions and share them with the intention to connect, that is, in a strong way, through the 5-step process of honesty, there is no such thing as being too emotional. Expressing emotions is only weak when we give in to emotionalism, when we're helpless or hostile or avoidant with our emotions, and dump them on others, to make them carry the burden instead of taking responsibility and expressing emotion with the intention to connect and relate with others. So, is it true that successful high-status men are not viewed as weak when they express their emotions? There might be a correlation that men who express their emotions in a healthy way become more successful, but being high status does not make you look strong if you express emotions in a weak way. The obvious example is Will Smith, one of the most charismatic, high-status, ultra-successful movie stars and rappers ever, manly and muscular enough to play Ali, but looked weak when he initiated violence and then threw a temper tantrum.
Keep my wife's name out your fucking mouth!
If we look at the psychological implications of Chris's belief, we notice that it reinforces the anxiety in the validation loop. Men need status to express their emotions could be restated as, I can't be authentic or I'll be seen as weak unless I'm high status or considered manly. Or, I need external validation to allow me to be authentic. It's a maladaptive belief that reinforces the validation-seeking loop. Now that we understand the loop, we can explain the 3 steps of responsibility, or how to express emotions in a strong way. The first is contribution. How do I contribute to this emotional issue with my healthy anger and unhealthy anxiety? Next we have payoff. What is the benefit you receive from the payoff? How does this feeling serve you in some way, even if it's just to put you in a familiar state? The final step is to relate. If there's somebody else involved in the conflict or situation that's causing the issue, give a charitable interpretation of their situation. Imagine what they must be feeling and relate with that feeling. This helps to overcome the isolation stage by connecting. No solution here, it's just to help regulate. Now we can see why the mental processes are a reflection of the emotional behaviors. Healthy anger is a response to a healthy need in reality. Another way to say, it's triggered by a fact, even if technically that fact is in your head. If you have a healthy need, but also a psychological issue that impedes you from attaining it, it must be a feeling, based on the other emotion, anxiety. Meaning is where we address the unconscious conflicts that inevitably lead to shame and isolation. The lack of responsibility is what creates the secondary emotional payoff. And how does what you are able to do, or at the very least say, relate to belief? Or what is an action, even a communication, if not an externalization of what you believe? So one way you're able to regulate affect is to talk through emotions in the context of the loop. The other way is to notice your loop and talk through it with honesty. To discover your own loop, I recommend Mark's book where he goes through all of the areas to investigate with examples for each step to help you get a clear picture of what your loop is. He also has a dedicated video course with workbooks if you prefer a course format that guides you through this exact process. They're the first links in the description. To give a brief explanation of how you'll do this, you'll talk through significant experiences, anger, anxiety, secrets, failures, and harms, and you'll discuss these areas under the headings of intimacy and authority. These steps map onto the sequence of the loop. Experiences cause anger. Anger causes anxiety. Anxiety causes secrets and the resulting isolation. Secrets cause the unhealthy behaviors in the payoffs, which lead to failures and harms. Before we get to the solution, we can now get back to Dr. K and the transdiagnostic factors.
How can all mental illness be getting worse at the same time? Like, that just doesn't make sense. What they discovered is that there are certain things called transdiagnostic criteria for mental illness. And what that means is that if you're perfectionistic, perfectionism is a risk factor for anxiety disorders, it's a risk factor for depression, it's a risk factor for like OCD, it's a risk factor for OCPD. So there are some basic traits which increase your risk for like all kinds of mental illnesses. A good example of this is like purposelessness. One of the two variables that correlates with pornography addiction the most is meaninglessness in life. Perfectionism is another one of these transdiagnostic criteria. So if you target these transdiagnostic criteria, then everything down the road will get better.
From Derian's model, transdiagnostic traits like perfectionism or purposelessness are not the deepest roots. Perfectionism is often a strategy born from the loop's unhealthy anxiety and can be a secondary payoff. It's not just a risk factor for anxiety disorders, it is an anxiety disorder. Purposelessness is often the outcome of living in the loop's isolation and chasing empty payoffs instead of authentic needs. Depression is the result of being stuck in isolation and shame and not getting your healthy needs met. OCD and OCPD stem from a pattern of avoiding anxiety. Dr. K suggests targeting these transdiagnostic factors directly. However, these are only symptoms as well. Derian's model offers a more fundamental approach. By understanding and transforming your core emotional loop through ritual and honesty, you address the root system. When the root is healthy, the branches, those transdiagnostic factors and various diagnoses, naturally begin to heal and transform. And we address the root system by focusing on the ritual. So how do we consistently apply honesty to break the loop? This is where Derian introduces the ritual. We have the intellectual understanding now, it's time to feel it, to automatize it. It's natural to experience resistance when working through your issues. The rituals are a way to get ahead of the resistance and to spend less time stuck when you do experience resistance. There are 9 main rituals. Try them out and make them your own. The last 3 are part of the return from the archetypical hero's journey. Bring the change and knowledge you've gained back to the community. The first ritual is therapy. Every time you talk through your emotional issues, they will be different because the act of talking through them changes them. Sometimes a little, sometimes a lot. There are 4 types of journal. You can journal about an emotional issue within the structure of the loop and honesty. You can also journal about your myth. You view your life as a whole, where you've been and where you're going. How negative experiences in your past would need to be resolved so you would be thankful they happened. What would you need to learn or integrate? You can also write about your dreams. Dreams present an image of your current emotional situation. Write all the details you can remember and what you felt. The meaning will often jump out at you. An AI chat thread can be a great companion to analyze the symbolism and help you with interpretation. There is a 4th journal type, but we'll cover that at the end. Most forms of meditation, like breath work or detaching from thoughts, are routines, not rituals. The ritual approach is to sit still and let thoughts and emotions come up. Ask yourself what you're avoiding or what you need. Sit for 15 to 30 minutes until you hit the resistance in your psyche. Group therapy is like going to the gym, but for psychological issues. Individual therapy will help to reorient you. Group is where you'll grow. It challenges you to express what you feel in a way others can connect with. It also challenges you to listen to what someone else has shared, identify the emotion behind it, and relate with your own experiences. The 5th ritual is to track. Instead of dieting, track your macros. Instead of budgeting, look at your bank account. Instead of blocking apps on your phone, write down how you spend your time. Instead of consciously trying to control your behavior, observe it, bring awareness to it. Forcing yourself to change often results in increased stress, which exacerbates the payoff and the emotional issues that cause the maladaptive behavior in the first place. Instead, get in touch with reality. Be exact with tracking at first, then loosen up. Repeat if the issue returns. The 6th is planned regressions. Schedule out cheat days. The payoff is caused by a buildup of stress. By planning out ways to blow off steam, we'll have less need to soothe ourselves in immature ways. By being aware when we do engage in the payoff, we take the pressure off. Feel checks is when you share a feeling with someone, once per day. It could be with anybody. Keep it light but genuine. See how you're responsible for the feeling and try to connect with the person you're sharing with. It takes 5 seconds, but take the extra moment to have a genuine interaction with someone. A variation on this is money talks. Once a week, share with someone how much you made that week and how much you spent. If you like, talk about any changes that you need to make or any feelings you need to talk about. The 8th ritual is the apology. Admit to someone you harmed that you harmed them, and also take responsibility for how you harmed them. 2 keys are to only discuss your fault, not the other person's fault, and it's helpful to talk about the emotional issue that made you think it was okay to hurt the person in the way you did. The final ritual is separation. No relationships have had and continue to have as much impact on you as the relationship with your parents. That's why it's vital to separate from them, to let their thoughts, feelings, and beliefs be their own, so you can create the best possible relationship with them. It doesn't need to be a good relationship, just the best possible. If you were raised by a grandparent, this ritual could be about them instead. Step 1 is the 4th type of journal I mentioned earlier, the separation journal. Choose one parent and write out what you hide from them, facts, beliefs, disagreements, resentments. Write out how you could bring up each one. Step 2 is to spend consistent time with that parent. It doesn't need to be a lot. It could be a weekly call or a monthly lunch. You decide. You don't need to say anything from the journal. You'll gradually become more open organically and create a healthier relationship with them and yourself. These rituals are different from common routines many of us use. Chris mentioned using post-it notes for gratitude and peace.
I have post-it notes around the house. So there's some next to the back door, there's some on the window in front of where my sort of computer sits. And it just asks me little questions like, are you as present as you could be right now? What went well today? And each time that I see one of those post-it notes, I try to take between sort of 15 and 30 seconds to have, okay, mind is resting where feet are. And what I mean by that is I'm not distracted. I'm not ruminating about yesterday. I'm not thinking about tomorrow. I'm not concerned about what's going to come. I'm not fretting about what's happened. And I just think, okay, like, can I do just 15 seconds or 30 seconds? And when I look back on the day, those moments often appear in the top 5 things that's happened. Like really just taking a moment. So that's weird. That's like gratitude at the end of the day for being grateful during the day, which is very nice because that's a sort of self-reinforcing cycle. The more gratitude you do, the more easy it is to find and the more grateful you are for your gratitude. So yeah, maybe the post-it note, or maybe you want to use reminders on your phone to sort of trigger you every few hours or something throughout the day. But that seems to work for me.
While these routines can offer temporary mood alteration or help in specific situations like pumping yourself up for a performance or suppressing anxiety during an important sales meeting, they are not tools for long-term mental health if used in isolation. Stringing together daily mood alterations without addressing the underlying loop is often a form of repression. It can exacerbate emotional issues in the long run, making the secondary emotional payoff worse and requiring more and more routines to keep the discomfort temporarily at bay. True ritual focuses on the cause. Many routines just manage the symptom. The ritual focuses on how to manage your emotions so that you naturally experience moments of gratitude and peace in your life. Routines attempt to force these moments into your life, often at the expense of covering up the underlying emotions that are the reason you're not organically experiencing moments of peace and gratitude in the first place. A useful rule of thumb is to be cautious of any technique that causes you to experience a positive emotion that wasn't the result of an action you took in reality. Gratitude lists, affirmations, and many forms of meditation, without doing the underlying emotional work, often become elaborate forms of repression. In severe cases like self-injury or depression, these short-term routines and techniques, such as grounding exercises or behavioral activation, can be useful to temporarily bring you back to baseline, so that actual work on the underlying issues can be done. Think of it like a crutch in the positive sense of the term. If you broke your foot, you would use a crutch to help during the healing process. However, using a crutch long-term, when you don't need it, can make your foot weaker.
This balance. The other thing as well to say is that this is a very hard thing to strike a balance of. So if you are someone that is trying to improve yourself, that has big dreams and big goals and all the rest of it, accepting this is the cost of doing business. This isn't some personal curse that's been bestowed on you that I'm having to suffer with this thing. God, how feeble and malignant and broken am I? How uniquely cursed is my particular setup? No. This is how everybody feels. This is every single person that wants to do a lot, that wants to know that they should enjoy life, but also wants to leave it all out there on the field of play. This is just par for the course. Hopefully that makes it seem a little bit easier to deal with. I'll tell you if I find out a proper solution.
Chris is correct that it's not a personal curse you have to suffer with. There is a way out of it. However, it's not everybody who feels this way. It's not a balance you have to strike or a cost of doing business. You can be purposeful and driven without whipping yourself, once you get clear on your healthy needs and confront the unhealthy anxiety that's causing the loop. This is the proper solution that has been missing in psychology until now.
A lot of the time when people ask, what advice would you give yourself 10 years ago? Invariably, that piece of advice is still the same thing that you need to hear now. Because the big problems are always the big problems. And for me, it would be fear less. Do the same things. Really change very little. Don't just stop fucking fearing about the outcome, dude. Stop worrying about whether you'll clamber out from underneath who you fucking were. You already have done that. You're already past those things. But these patterns are just going to keep coming up. The big problems are the big problems. In the same way that you've got the same fucking feet that you had 20 years ago, you've got the same brain that you had 20 years ago.
As Chris astutely points out, the big problems are the big problems. The advice from 10 years ago applies equally today. These maladaptive loops are usually survival mechanisms to cope with unmanageable stress in childhood, which, though painful, feel familiar. They're addictions which will continue until we get to the root of the issue. However, the goal isn't to fear less, it's to manage the fear, to slow down, let yourself feel the fear, examine the underlying beliefs and confront the fear boldly and consistently. This is the decision point of the loop. Anxiety will become excitement, isolation and shame will become connection and authenticity. Secondary emotional payoffs will give way to healthy, primary emotional payoffs, combinations of confidence, compassion, worthiness and capability. Maladaptive beliefs will switch to adaptive beliefs, from I'm not good enough to I am good enough. This is a gradual process. You're rewriting long-term patterns of behavior. You'll experience resistance and pain. New anxieties will surface as your life expands and challenges arise. Old payoffs will return, but by engaging in the ritual and focusing on honesty in the loop, you'll spend less time stuck and more time engaged in reality, meeting your authentic needs. Check the description for a link to Mark Derian's new book, The Therapy Manifesto, which this video is based on. Like and subscribe, and thank you for watching.